Good afternoon, Porch Bible Church. Pastor Ben here for our pre-sermon video for the message this coming Sunday. I ask, as I often do in these videos, please be in prayer for me as I continue to study and meditate on this text and get ready to preach it to all of you, that I would be faithful in this endeavor. As we think about this next portion of chapter 4, unlike last week where we covered 10 verses, we're only covering two this week, verses 11 and 12. And these verses have a message here for us to seriously consider and be reminded of. And it's related also to everything we've been talking about so far. In chapter 3, we're talking about taming the tongue and keeping it under control, which has some bearing here on this passage as well. But also in the first part of chapter 4, which we saw last week, what causes fights and quarrels among us? It's our preferences, it's our desires, it's what we want to see happen. And that's speaking when we let the world influence our thinking around us than we think of Christ and his word. James here gives a little bit more of a specific example. That's why we're tackling it separately of what happens when we let worldly thinking creep in and what then is the result that we do among each other. How do we conduct ourselves in the church? And sadly, when we let the world creep in, what we do is we have our standards, we have our preferences, and we hold people to certain standards. And what are those standards? Well, what they should be is the biblical standards. But what so often happens, to James's point, is it becomes our standards, and we judge or slander people according to what we think they should be doing, and they're not, because that's what I think should be happening. James writes in verse 11, "Do not speak against one another, brothers." That's how he starts off this passage. And this first sentence, there's a command. Don't do it. Don't have any part of this. This idea of worldliness that is creeping in, where we start to judge one another based on what we think should be happening. So to summarize that first part of the verse, we could paraphrase and say, don't do it. And yet, so often it happens in churches. He says, "The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. If you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge." There is only one lawgiver and judge. Obviously, who's that? It's the Lord. He who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? He ends with a question there for us to ponder. And the question is quite obvious. Not me. I shouldn't be doing that. But James leaves it hanging there because that's what so many believers so often do. We know we're not supposed to judge to a certain extent, but so often we do that. There is a time to judge. The ultimate judge is the Lord, but there is a time where we see by the fruit of people's lives that they're dealing with sin that needs to be confronted. Oh, the fruit of the Spirit. I can judge rightly and see that they really truly believe the Lord, they are a Christian. There are some right instances for some judgment, but that's not the context of this passage. The content of this passage is the fact that we have a standard and we judge people according to that standard. And the standard is, you're not doing what I think you should be doing. The problem is, when we do that, we actually become lawbreakers ourselves. We judge people for not holding the law or the scriptures while breaking the law ourselves. It's an interesting play that James draws out here, and a good one for us to ponder because it brings some conviction to realize, why do I keep pointing the finger at other people? Hey, you, why are you doing that? And not take time to examine ourselves. And that's what this passage needs to be about, to slow down and say, Lord, where am I judging instead of where am I examining? And that's what we need to do. We need to examine our hearts and say, Lord, am I walking in obedience to you, or am I condemning people for not doing what I think they should be doing for you? So often it should be the former, but so often it's actually the latter is what we're guilty of. So ponder that, pray about that, and get ready for Sunday. And be in prayer for me as well. And we'll see you next time.